Welcome to the Web3, Metaverse, and AI Show. This is a weekly go-to destination to help business owners, creators, and professionals stay on top of and better understand the future of these quickly evolving technologies. My name's Mitch Jackson. I've been a trial lawyer for 3 decades, and I've had the privilege of playing around in all the different tech sandboxes over the last 25 or so years. We've helped clients navigate the digital dance at the intersection of law and business and technology, recently including the metaverse and Web3. And with all of those spaces, being able to communicate, whether it's through your voice, through the movement of your avatar, through real life interactions, especially in this noisy and hectic and crowded world that we're living in now, it's never been more important. And that's why I wanted to reach out and have JaMarr Johnson join us today. I had the pleasure of meeting JaMarr in Scottsdale, Arizona at the first ever CEX event. We both spoke at the event. And I thought that JaMarr would be a perfect complement to adding value to my community moving forward to help us all communicate better, faster, and more effectively moving forward in 2023. JaMarr is an entrepreneur. We're going to talk about that, JaMarr. Keynote speaker and veteran. Thank you for your service, by the way. Building creator businesses to $1 million in revenue. We first met, like I said, over at CEX in Scottsdale, and I wanted to share JaMarr with you. I did this because I believe that in today's busy and attention-draining world, effective communication is more important than ever. With so many distractions, it can be challenging to get your message across and to have your voice heard above all the noise. And that's where JaMarr comes in. He has the answers to these communication challenges. As someone who spent years performing, pitching, and fundraising, JaMarr knows that brevity is key. And he believes that when you find the right people to communicate your message to, it's really hard to say the wrong thing. So if you're an entrepreneur, a creator, a business owner in the Web3, metaverse, or AI spaces, or a traditional business owner or entrepreneur outside of the digital spaces, and you're having challenges getting your audience to hear your message, you're having challenges to get them to sit at the edge of their seats to pay attention to your content, I think you're going to enjoy today's show. JaMarr is going to share his best tips, approaches, and techniques to help all of us connect, exchange value, and build better partnerships faster. JaMarr, welcome to the show. It's good to see you.
Thank you so much for having me, Mitch. I appreciate that incredible introduction. It wasn't brief, but it wasn't too long, so I appreciate that.
I'll tell you what, I had twice as much to say about you, but knowing that you were my guest, I actually cut it in half. But I was thinking that as I was sharing all the important things that I think context is really important, JaMarr. I think context in today's communication efforts and today's communication channels is key to connecting, to building rapport, to building relationships, and eventually bringing in new clients and customers. And so let me give a little bit of context to the audience about who you are and where your interest is. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself? Where'd you grow up? Why did you become part of our military? And what brought you to creating UpMind Media?
Thank you so much for that. So, Mitch, I am originally from New York City, born and raised there in 1979 in the Bronx at Jacobi Hospital. And my father was Marine, my uncle was Marine. I had a lot of family members in the military. And growing up in New York City, especially when I moved in from the Bronx into Upper Manhattan in Spanish Harlem, I didn't quite fit in. And so growing up in the Bronx was a completely different overall environment than Spanish Harlem. And so I found myself having to find ways to connect with people that, although we looked similar, we had different educational backgrounds. And so I found myself constantly defending myself, mostly verbally, sometimes physically, on the streets of New York. So it was a jungle out there, but I managed to learn how to leverage my ability to communicate using humor in order to deflect and defend, and at the same time befriend people. And that was a way that I actually learned how to really communicate using humor on a large level. So at the end of my high school career, I had an incredible opportunity, Mitch. Um, I had interned with this nonprofit called Facing History and Ourselves. And on my 18th birthday, I was one of three students who were selected to come and give our experience with the nonprofit. I both interned with them and they actually did a curriculum in my school. So I had about 2 years worth of experience with them. And so, as one of three people, I was chosen to speak in front of about 2,000 people at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel in New York City. And it was an incredible honor. In attendance was a gentleman by the name of Kofi Annan. May he rest in peace, who at the time was the head of the United Nations. So, now, I didn't know who he really was in the grand scheme of things. But that experience, being able to speak in front of that many people, have an impact, sharing my story and how that nonprofit really impacted my life, it was really life changing. I had a lot of opportunities to go and get additional internships and stay in the city, but I had bigger dreams. I wanted to kind of get out and see the world. I wanted to have a chance to, earn my own living, perhaps pursue an education. And so for me, growing up without having the means from a financial standpoint to just go to any school that I wanted, I knew that I was going to have to figure out how to earn a scholarship or pay my way through. And so I looked at the military and the GI Bill as a tremendous opportunity. Now, my father he passed away when I was 9 years old. My uncle was alive. He advised me not to join the Marine Corps for various reasons, but I was hard headed and I had a plan that I was going to execute. And he was no way he was going to stop me. So I joined the military, enlisted as a Marine because my father was Marine, my uncle's Marine, so I had to prove that I was as tough as they were. And then after I did that, I was in for about a year and a half before I got word that the scholarship that I applied for, the academic scholarship, the NROTC scholarship, because of all the things that I had done, captain of my basketball team, graduated valedictorian, internships, all of the things that I had done, it put me in position to be able to earn that scholarship. And so from there, I went to Auburn University in Alabama. And halfway through that experience at school, I ended up switching from the Marine Corps option to the Navy option, which is very rare. But it was because all of the mentors that were at the school were mostly Navy. So I got to ask questions and get more mentorship from them and realized that from an intellectual curiosity, from an actual travel standpoint, the Navy would be a better fit. So I ended up joining the Navy and I spent about 14 years in the military and I had a great time, traveled the world, got a master's degree. But overall, I would say that when I was in the military, my best friend Sean Wilkerson, who just retired from the Navy after 24 years, he sent me a book that changed my life. And that book was Rich Dad Poor Dad. And when I say is when I read that book, my third eye, and that I was spelled with an E for entrepreneurship, was opened up in my mind. And I realized what I had always been and what I wanted to be when I left the military. And so that's part of the reason why I started my company. And the whole meaning behind the name Upmind is that we have to always be increasing our knowledge, increasing our know-how, increasing our skills if we want to make an impact in this world. So Upmind is just representation of both elevating your knowledge, but also elevating your ability to function on a high level with your brain. And so that's what Upmind Media is all about. And Mitch, as we're making this recording here, media is more than just vital. When you think about the old saying content is king, I've got a new phrase that I want to coin, and that is content is queen. Because if you ever play a game of chess, you realize that the queen has the most range on the chessboard. And so content works for you 24/7, day and night. To me, it's the ultimate automation factor. And I have a saying, automation is to your time what compound interest is to your money. And so if you learn how to create effective media, you will have extreme impact in the marketplace. And that's what I'm up to.
JaMarr, I love everything that you just said, and I think everyone in the audience. This is why we're here today. Isn't JaMarr amazing? Look,
Thank you.
I want to let everyone know that in about 20 minutes, about halfway through today's show, we're going to open this up for live Q&A. If you raise your hand, we'll bring you up on stage. And I am checking our LinkedIn private messages and Twitter DMs. We're getting a few questions and comments in already, JaMarr.
Okay.
I'm happy to say 100% complimentary. Everyone's excited to hear your message. So you mentioned, uh, say that again about it's not content is king, content is queen, right?
Content is queen. Yes,
And
the queen has the most range on the chessboard. Exactly.
I love that, especially, today's International Women's Day, right? And
Absolutely.
I
Wow.
think
What a coincidence.
what a coincidence. I think the world would be a better place if every single day, and it is in my world, is International Women's Day, right? I think the world would be a better place. And so this is great, just leading into your background, how you made things happen, the decisions you made. But it sounds like even during the early years, survival of the fittest, it's using your gift of communication to communicate your message to stay out of trouble, or maybe to lead you into trouble to correct the problems that you were seeing as you're walking down the street, where you grew up. And talk to us a little bit about, at what point in your life, what point in your career did you appreciate the fact that being able to communicate is so damn important, and keeping that communication brief? What led you to rolling out in Upmind Media different ways to show your customers and your clients how to communicate, in a brief but persuasive fashion?
Okay. Well, Mitch, I appreciate that large two-part question, right? There's a lot to kind of process there. When I talk about my upbringing, I remember specifically incidents where when I didn't communicate correctly, it led to being punched in the mouth. So that's one of those things. I don't know if you ever heard the quote by Mike Tyson. He says, "Everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face," right? Well,
Oh yeah.
those types of incidents accumulated over time, there's a compound effect of learning how to go right up to the edge without crossing it in order to get people out of the frame of mind of maybe committing violence towards you, right? So, knowing that I was going to get bullied at times, I would use my ability to articulate and not necessarily, I didn't know it at the time. I didn't think I was using jokes, but I was disarming the bully with compliments, with humor, and then also a large part of communication is what we tell ourselves. A lot of people say that public speaking is the most feared thing in the world, second only to death. And if you think about that, it's because back hundreds and thousands of years ago, we only really spoke in front of groups of people when our life was on the line because we were about to be expelled from the group, or if we were the leader of the group, right? So that's a lot of pressure either way. I figured out that learning how to communicate effectively, learning how to have quick comebacks, they have to be brief because if your comeback is too long, it doesn't, people don't give it time. They move on, or they keep laughing at the thing that was said about you. So your comeback has to be sharp and quick, and so that's where I developed that speed of thinking quick on my feet. But I will also say that you have to, leaders are readers. You have to read a lot in order to be able to have these thoughts ruminating in your mind, especially when it comes to on the humor side. People think, hey, you're either born funny or you're not. It's actually a skill that you can teach, that I teach people, that I've seen people get taught how to do it effectively. And what it does is it opens up, it relaxes the audience to what is being presented to them. There's actually a study, I've got some books about the science on this, but when you use humor, you actually increase the information uptake by about 30%. Right. So I learned this years later, but I was using it in real time and it was very, very effective.
I love that. There's something that you said that I think a lot of us may glance over or forget in 15 or 20 minutes, and that is, we're not born being funny, but it's something we can learn. And I remember listening to Kevin Hart being interviewed, I think by Tim Ferriss. And when you see Kevin on one of his, large shows doing his thing, what he talks about is how much work and effort he put in starting a year and a half earlier, working on his material, testing it out in these small little comedy shops, right? Continuing to tweak it so that when we see him on HBO or on Netflix or wherever he may be appearing, that's a very hard worked, polished end presentation that didn't just happen by coincidence. And one of the things, JaMarr, I would love to have you maybe dive a little bit deeper on is when we look at communicating in today's world, what are some things that we can do, especially taking into consideration attention challenges, the mass amount of information that's being put out there right now? What can we do right now as business owners and entrepreneurs to learn how to communicate better, to inject a bit of humor into our message, and to connect in ways that maybe our competition isn't connecting with our potential customer base?
The first thing we can do is add a little more humility to your diet. Okay. What I mean by that is it is okay to start creating content and start using your voice to tell your stories and not do it perfectly. That makes you human. Okay. You're only going to get better from there. The next thing I would say, you can actually just go look at the people you follow that you really like the content and try to just mimic not everything that they do, right? You want to still keep your essence, but mimic a little bit of the things that they do. Notice their mannerisms. Notice your ability to actually lean into the camera, right? And draw people in. One of the strangest things that happened, so I've done over 10,000 videos on my phone alone. And one of the weirdest things that I had to get used to was actually just looking into the lens of the phone instead of looking at myself on camera. That little change and shift of where your eyes are will have a huge impact on the end user who ends up watching that video, which will help them determine if you're actually engaging with them, the audience, or whether you're just looking at yourself in the viewfinder. So we're going to talk about this a little bit later, but I have a course called Super Connected here on LinkedIn Learning. And I was just trying to make love to the camera lens the entire time. It's a strange feeling, but think about the person that you're trying to reach in mind. And what I also say is, even when I'm speaking to a room with 1,000 people or 20,000, I'm trying to connect with just one person. I'm making it personal for that one person. The odds are, because of the Pareto principle, right, 80-20 rule, you're going to end up impacting more people, but my mission is always to impact one. So when you turn that camera on, think about the person you're trying to connect with. Think about that customer avatar. Be humble. Be okay. It's okay to make mistakes. Oftentimes, I'll have small little mistakes when I'm making a video, but I leave it in because the idea is speed, repetition, and increasing that number count, because over time I'm going to get better and better and better to the point that you can pretty much call me one take Drake at this point.
I love that. One take Drake. Well, that is what I'm going to start calling you. So talk to us a little bit about learning how to use the equipment like you just mentioned, but also making sure that we're adding value. We're sharing quality content. We're not wasting the time of our potential audience. For example, I've got a comment here. How can we figure out what to talk about if we're using a smartphone video to deliver our message? So, talk to us a little bit about how important the value is in the content that we're sharing, JaMarr, because I don't think we want to gloss over that particular issue.
Absolutely. So, right, this is where a little bit of research is, and some of it can be super deep and complex, but let's just look at the surface level. If you think about the product or the service that you provide to the marketplace, go Google that product or service type, and then ask Google, what are the top 10 questions that people have concerning that issue, that product, that service? And then from there, think about where your expertise are. Think about the stories that you have as it relates to those answers. And then what I would say is, while you could script out maybe 2 or 3 bullet points that you want to cover, think about having it be as authentic and real as possible. The ums and ahs and the thoughts that you're having while you're making those videos, people want to feel real. They don't want to see super scripted, right? If you look at the most well-polished content, doesn't automatically get views. What gets views is the authenticity of the person that they're connecting with. Then the next thing I would say is you have to start to learn how to tell stories and how to tell them in a brief way. Everyone has that friend that says, "Oh, let me tell you something," and then you kind of go and sigh like, "Oh boy, how long is the story going to take?" Don't be that person. Learn to tell your stories in a compact manner, and that's where actually learning how to be funny or storytell really comes into place, because people just see the person speaking and performing, but what they don't realize is that that person wrote that story down, told it many times, but also edited it, took the time line by line to cut out the fat in the story so that it can be impactful in a short period of time. And the best storytellers learn how to do that naturally, like just in their head, but you could do it just by writing down your story and then asking yourself every 3 or so sentences, am I giving someone food for thought, something to think about, a pause, or something that will make them laugh per se? And if you're doing that, that's a good frame rate. Typically, like for example, in stand-up comedy, we look for about 2 to 3 laughs per minute. If you can do 4 or more, that's considered headline level, which actually right now in America, there's probably only about 400 people who are nationally touring headliners that can perform at that 4 or more level per minute, because of all of the ways that they add little postures, point of views, sounds, facial expressions, and all of those things count on camera. And that's how you can make some of your content a lot more engaging and interesting.
In my Monday LinkedIn newsletter that goes out weekly, I talked about the power of storytelling, JaMarr, and I talked about three different styles that I use in court, three different styles I'll use in mediations or even with clients. One's the hero story, and another one I like to use, it's the emotional story. And this is how we
Hmm.
make our point. This is how we connect with my jury or with the judge or with opposing counsel. Talk to us a little bit, JaMarr, about using stories, whether we're creating social media content, whether we're responding in comments. Instead of saying, hey, great post, maybe we can respond in a 3 or 4 sentence story. I think that's what helps us stand out. Talk to us a little bit about expanding the use of stories in those types of situations.
Absolutely. Well, think about this, for example. My mother is a recovering crackhead. She's going on 31 years clean of her addiction this year. So don't feel bad for me. Mom is doing great. But think about how I just dropped that bomb, so to speak. No one was expecting that. Now imagine if I tell you that earlier today I had a talk with a woman who's looking for someone to come speak at their annual fundraiser to raise awareness to a shelter here in Austin, Texas. And I'm on the phone and I'm hearing about their mission, and it reminds me of my upbringing because while my mother was using drugs as a child, there were times that we spent time in a battered women's shelter. There were times that I had to go and be in foster care while my other siblings were spread out across the city, the 5 boroughs, while my mother was getting treatment that she was finally ready to receive. And luckily, we didn't lose our apartment, and luckily, she regained custody. My mother realized that she had to not just heal for herself, but she had to take her kids through therapy, through counseling, through coaching, so that we could heal the wounds that had been formed inside of us. And in doing so, she was able to reclaim and save her family. And that's why my mother is my hero to this day. My mother is a sought after speaker in NA. And I think that I get a lot of my gifts from her because she could take people to the depths of pain and suffering, but also make them laugh and make them smile and make them want to wipe away their tears because you know what? This too shall pass. And so that's where I really learned, the serenity prayer, right? For God to grant us the serenity to accept the things that we cannot change, the courage to change the things that we can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And so I laughed and I cried, and I was able to learn the power of storytelling because it kept people from using drugs or running from their problems. Same thing, it's just one is using a substance and the other is just using excuses to actually not get the things done in the world that you know you were meant to do. Now's the time.
JaMarr Johnson, he's a keynote speaker, a veteran. He's the founder of UpMind Media. And I think with that last response, everyone knows why you're here today, JaMarr. Love how you
Thank
just,
you.
yeah, it's okay to use stories in everyday conversation, isn't it? Whether we're talking to a neighbor who's standing across the street, whether we're talking with a potential client over the phone, or we're in the metaverse in a spatial venue having a conversation, about International Women's Day with our friends and our business leaders in the metaverse space. I mean, why is it that people don't use stories more often?
I think it's because while we have been using stories for over 100,000 years, and it is the way that we're wired to truly connect. It's the way that we are wired to release oxytocin when someone's telling a compelling story that we agree with. It's the same way that when someone makes us laugh while telling a story, oxytocin is also released, which makes us feel more connected to the people around us in our nearest vicinity as well as the person actually speaking. I think the issue comes down to is because we're not actually being trained on how to do it at an early age, it becomes a fear of what if I fail? And also, listen, like to this day, I probably get a little bit of energy running through my body, right? The emotion is just the energy in motion in my body. But because of the way I've been able to frame my thinking, I can either make that emotion nervous energy or I could make it excitement. You get to frame it in your mind. So what you communicate to yourself is what you're going to be able to then communicate to the audience. So if you're telling yourself, I hope I don't fail, I hope I don't fail, I hope I don't fail, then you've just taken that energy, you've made it negative, and it has a chance to interrupt your thoughts and block you from reaching and accessing the entirety of your creativity when you're up there so that you can deliver your message in the most effective way possible.
but you weren't born knowing how to do that. And I want to invite our guest, if you want to come up, raise your hand, come up and say hi to JaMarr, ask a question, share your thoughts and comments. This is the time to do it. I'll bring you up on stage one at a time. Love to have everyone in the audience join us, JaMarr. But that's not something you were born knowing how to do. Can you share with our listeners, both live and recorded, maybe some of your favorite books or tools or resources, maybe some courses that you offer that will help us learn how to tell better stories, that will help us learn how to communicate better with our prospective clients and with our existing customers?
Absolutely. Well, I was really fortunate. In high school, for me, I went to a specialized high school inside the Julia Richmond building in New York City on 68th Street and 2nd Avenue called Vanguard. And one of the things that they required was that you wrote a 20-page paper for each course and portfolio project, and you had to deliver a 5-minute presentation along with a 5-minute Q&A to determine your grade. So for 2 years, I had that training before my 18th birthday, in which I also had the assistance of a speech coach who was a thespian. So at an early age, I was training, doing it on my own without, much resources other than just practicing. And then at 18, I had that coach. And then from there, I've invested, thousands of dollars in different programs, whether that be training with, world-renowned storytellers, learning how to actually write effectively, whether that be writing for humor, writing for improv, or writing for stand-up. So there are a bunch of things that you can do in your city, wherever you are. And then, of course, I offer virtual services myself in coaching people, especially in B2B. People don't realize your ability to speak, not just in front of people, but on camera, can impact your business from a business development standpoint, because the content that you make is going to be reaching someone. And so you're either inspiring confidence in your knowledge and wisdom and capabilities, or people are just avoiding your content completely. And so you have to decide which side you're going to be. It takes time, energy, and effort. Also, when you start to learn these processes, now you can watch anything. I can watch any TED Talk and learn a thing or two because I understand the different tools, right? I understand what tactics they're using in order to make sure the information stays in you. And some people are using those and some people aren't. And there's a clear difference in how much those things are viewed. And you can actually look at it. They've studied this. Most of the TED Talks that have the highest view count have a huge amount of humor built into those presentations. And so humor, to me, is the ultimate equalizer. I say it's the fastest point between strangers, is making someone laugh.
My late father-in-law, who I've written about on several occasions, Mike the Milkman, one of the funniest guys I've ever met in my life. We were begging him for years to write a book and put his stories, into chapters. And unfortunately, Mike left us too soon, just a couple of weeks ago, before we had the chance to do that, right? But that's what made Mike so personable. That's why wherever he went, everyone enjoyed being around him, because he was entertaining, he was memorable, he created these experiences that, for example, you mentioned Talk Like Ted. Carmine Gallo, who's a friend of mine, wrote the book Talk Like Ted, and Carmine interviewed 200 of the top TED speakers. What makes these men and women click, right? And he boiled it down into some simple formulas to use that, like you mentioned, JaMarr, when you take some of the things, being memorable, being unique, creating content that people can repeat, for example, it allows you to connect and build rapport. Now, I'm not a big fan of everyone walking around sounding like somebody speaking from the stage at TED. I think it's really important to embrace your own uniqueness and to stand out and be different. But to do that, and one thing I've noticed, a lot of people, for whatever reason, they don't give themselves permission to do this, JaMarr, is they don't speak from the heart. They're not speaking with passion. And I think they're afraid to. They're afraid to let their emotions show. They're afraid to let their internal feelings be displayed through their oral, written, or video communications. I think as a trial lawyer, that's what's helped me win some really big cases, is being vulnerable and speaking from the heart. Talk to us a little bit about in business, in Web3, in the metaverse, in traditional Web2 companies. How important, if at all, do you feel it is speaking from the heart? And for those individuals that may have a hard time giving themselves permission to do that, can you share some ideas or some ways that they can kind of open up, let their guard down a little bit, and share in a meaningful and memorable way?
Sure. So when you say speaking from the heart, the first word that pops into my head is vulnerability. And because I had been able to see my mother being vulnerable when she shared all of her stories of the trials and tribulations that she went through in trying to find herself and how that led her to use substances for escape. I got to see very, very early on in my life, subconsciously that, vulnerability is one of your greatest strengths. And so when people think about exposing their vulnerabilities, their first thought is, well, if people know these things about me, they're going to think lesser of me. When in fact, when you're able to share your vulnerabilities, people are able to respect you more for A, knowing yourself, and then B, you have the ability to then surround yourself with people that can protect you and support you in those vulnerabilities. And so maybe those vulnerabilities don't ever go away completely, but you have them clearly in front of you, and you have a support network that is making sure that those vulnerabilities don't pull you all the way down. So we all have them. We all have shortcomings. We're all human beings. We need each other. Like, we're designed to be connected to one another. And so a little bit in my course, Super Connecting, which is available on LinkedIn Learning, I talk about that in terms of when you're connecting with people, you want to follow the thread. And instead of worrying about how to speak yourself and be the most interesting person, if you can really focus on being interested and asking the right questions and following the thread, when someone's about to open up and be vulnerable, give them space instead of just waiting to match stories or waiting to say, I totally am the same way. Ask a deeper question, which will give them permission to be more vulnerable, and you'll build a much stronger bond. And I think if you do that, if you practice that regularly, you'll feel more confident in sharing your vulnerabilities and realizing that we all have way more in common than not.
I'd love to have you repeat that last thought because what I've noticed is some people will pretend like they're listening to someone else telling a
Hmm.
story and they feel the need, it's probably subconsciously, they feel the need to up that story. Oh, I've been there or I did that instead
Yeah.
of asking a follow-up open-ended questions. Let's dive a little bit deeper into that while at the same time I'd like you to touch, if you don't mind, upon being transparent or being strategically transparent. Because it's one thing to do those 10,000 videos, like you mentioned, using your phone with dirty laundry or dirty dishes, in the sink
Sure.
behind you, as opposed to maybe doing it from an office with a crooked picture behind you. I think strategic transparency is important, and there is a distinction. So maybe if you could just maybe dive a little bit deeper on each of those issues.
Sure. So brevity is levity. It elevates the situation. And so when you're talking with someone and they're being vulnerable with you, before you even look to ask that next open-ended question, take a moment to acknowledge how much you appreciate them sharing that with you first. Because that'll actually buy you a lot more time to ask a really more penetrating question the next time around versus simply, and this is the way I like to look at it. And this is very strategic. People love talking about themselves, right? We all know that. We all love when someone is interested in learning about us and we want to talk more and more and more. But when you're networking, when you're trying to build partnerships, the way I look at it is you want to accumulate so much goodwill in your account with the person that you're speaking with that first of all they've never experienced it before. That's one aim of mine. And then second, at some point they realize, oh my God, I've made this whole interaction all about me. And now they feel compelled to go deeper with you. And that's when you can then allow them to know the ways in which you guys are aligned and can totally synergize moving forward. So that's one way that I would recommend. But I would say that vulnerability does not mean airing dirty laundry. It means acknowledging the places in which you have fell short. It means acknowledging mistakes that you've made, but it doesn't mean putting all your personal business on the internet. Keep your personal life, the life that you want to keep offline, completely offline, but share with anecdotes and stories. And like you mentioned earlier, even with metaphors, you can hint at the idea of how this story or metaphor about someone that could be a quote unquote fictional character, but you're really talking about yourself in that scenario. There are all sorts of ways to show and be vulnerable. And more importantly, like again, when people hear you share, where you're able to really look into that camera and take a moment to to breathe and say, yeah, I didn't think I was going to be able to talk about this, but if sharing what I'm about to share can help at least one person, then it'll be worth sharing. And that would be in a way to be strategically vulnerable.
Yeah, it takes a bit of courage to do that, but I think once you try it and you do it like you're speaking from the heart and you really mean what you're saying or you're listening with intent, I think that makes all the difference in the world. And we've got some very successful people down in the audience, JaMarr, who probably are doing this on a daily basis. I know John Farron, who's joining us all the way from Australia, who does labor law. I know he engages in this type of activity, when dealing with employers, when dealing with employees. Bill Bispec's dealing with lawyers and legal agencies all day long. I know dealing with lawyers all day long. We love to talk about ourselves. And I have a feeling Bill's probably got that wired in. Jennifer, a dear friend of mine from Los Angeles, gifted trial lawyer. I know she and I have talked about this in the past. The things you're talking about, JaMarr, are things that once you figure it out, once that light switch is flipped on, it changes everything with building rapport, with building relationships, and in our case, with winning trials. You mentioned metaphors, and they're one of my favorite tools to help make a conversation or story interesting. They're one of my favorite persuasive or communication approaches to get a jury to do what I need that jury to do to bring home a verdict that allows my clients to find justice. Maybe talk to us, if you don't mind, JaMarr, a little bit about how you use metaphors, what they are, and some different ways of crafting powerful and persuasive metaphors for the unique circumstances that you need to use a metaphor in.
Sure, Mitch. Well, I use metaphors a lot especially when I'm doing comedy. But when I'm keynote speaking, I think metaphors allow people to see the picture that you're trying to paint in their mind. It allows them to put themselves someplace. And everyone, of course, is painting a different picture. And so being, brief with your words, being strategic, using words in a very eloquent way will allow people to most see the same picture. But of course, there's going to be some variance in what people are seeing. But you're using a metaphor right when you either get a couple of responses. One is when you get a laugh, when you get a sigh, or when you get a ah, where everyone is on the same page with you, because what you were explaining before may have been a little over their head for the moment. Metaphors simplify it and make it much easier to understand and digest, but also for people to empathize with the situation.
For friends of mine that want to learn how to craft and use metaphors better, a friend of mine, Ann Miller, out of, I believe, New York, has written several really good books, JaMarr, on how to write and use metaphors. One metaphor she helped me with the night before a closing argument helped me bring home a multi-million-dollar verdict for my client. So I'm a big fan of Ann's. And in my Tuesday Substack, JaMarr, the article was The Power of Metaphors, but here's why I'm bringing it up.
Yes.
Yeah, right? But here's what I'm bringing up. I had a subline that really captured the attention of a lot of people. So the title of the article is The Power of Metaphors, and then I went on to add, good metaphors serve as a Trojan horse that sneaks your message into the hearts and minds of your audience, right?
I love that.
Yeah,
I
it,
love
it
that. And
just
so
clicks, doesn't it?
let's do Inception. Let's do Inception here, right? Let's take that metaphor, right? The Trojan horse that it slips, information into the listener's mind and say, and if you wrap it with humor, you not only befriend them, they bring you closer and closer to their heart.
Ooh, yes. That's what it's all about. It's, when you wrap it with human relationships and real connections, it's like inviting your best friend over after dinner for a fresh, hot slice of apple pie and ice cream, right? That just makes me
I love
smile.
that. Yeah,
It just makes me
I
smile,
just
right?
smile.
I'm smelling the
I
apple
just
pie.
smile.
I'm tasting the ice cream. And JaMarr, metaphors, I mean, I think those are the secret weapon in business.
I agree.
All right, moving.
And comedy.
Well, and comedy, but as hard. All right, let's be real for a second. As hard as I've
Hmm.
tried to learn and study and to add humor into my content, I have failed over and over and over again. And I know that because Garrett, who you met in Scottsdale, who's 23, my daughter,
Uh-huh.
who's 28, they're like, Dad, that's a complete fail. Don't even try to go there. You're not funny, right? At some point in time, should we punt if we're not good at humor in our communications, or do we need to simply roll our sleeves up, double down, and try twice as hard? What are your thoughts? I don't think I'm a funny guy, and that's why I'm asking.
So Mitch, what I would say is that if you have the desire to use humor, you more than likely have the capability of using it. It's just you haven't used it effectively yet. And so there are ways that you can learn. There are techniques that you can learn. And what I would say too is, not only have I taken stand-up classes and improv classes, I've seen people who started the class that most people would probably say, oh, that person is not funny and there's no way they're going to get funny. But it is an accumulation of those hours, right, of working towards it. But also understanding, quite frankly, everybody has a different avatar. And so from you, Mitch, because of your avatar, the types of humor that you may be able to deliver are going to be very different from my avatar, right? And so it's understanding how you're perceived by the prospective audience that determines how you should actually deliver the content that you want to be humorous. And so I think what a lot of people fail to do is understand how they're really perceived, because that kind of dictates what the audience will deem is acceptable from you, and thus will give you leeway in those areas. And so I think learning that will then help you to write funnier, think funnier, but also too it just takes a lot of practice. Once you know what to do, you have to practice that, because if you don't use it, you lose it.
Oh, that makes sense. I mean, like anything else in life, the more we do it, the more we practice it, the more we learn it, the better we
Because I
get.
bet you this what I bet you this, Mitch. I bet you this. I bet you when you're in conversation with close friends, you've made them laugh more than you can count. Correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I get what you're
So
saying.
you
It's,
have, yeah.
but do you think there's ever, what about using humor at the wrong time or place? I mean, that can be a challenge too, right? You have to know when it's appropriate to go that direction.
So here's the thing: risk versus reward. You have to think about the time and place where you're about to release what you think is humorous, and also understand that being humorous is not always about being the one who says the joke. Sometimes it's about being able to create the environment, especially from a leadership standpoint, where your colleagues, coworkers, and people that you manage feel comfortable enough and creative enough and open enough in your presence that they're willing to try to take the risk in order to add some levity to the situation. So sometimes it's just being the facilitator of humor in your presence, not simply trying to be funny all the time. So yeah, time and place. You don't want to be the class clown when you're running a multi-million dollar company all the time, but you want to have the capacity and the empathy to truly connect with people on that limbic level.
Oh, so important. I watched last year. I watched a defense attorney make a joke in a very
Hmm.
tragic wrongful death case. I was representing a family who lost a loved one during the jury selection process. It was completely inappropriate. I don't know what he was thinking, but it backfired. I don't think anyone on that
Hmm.
jury liked the guy at all for the rest of the trial. And I thought to
Yep.
myself, dude, read the room. Uh, Put
Yep.
everything into the proper context before you open your mouth. And that's kind of what I was getting at is I guess we just kind of have to learn using our other people skills when it's appropriate to do really any of the things that we
Yes.
talked about today. I'll tell you what is appropriate and what I want to do and what I need to double down on is I want to share you with my community, JaMarr. I want you to
I appreciate
please
that.
share with all of us if people want to reach out, if they want to improve all of the above, everything we've discussed today, what's the best way to get in touch with you? What are some of the resources and tools that you offer? How can they become your clients? How can they become your consulting, client moving forward in 2023?
Thank you so much for that, Mitch. And before we do go, it looks like we have someone with a hand raised. I don't know if you
Yeah.
saw that, Mitch. Your buddy from the Down Under,
I did
Mr.
not
John
see
Ferry,
it.
would like to
Yeah,
ask a question. Yeah, he's
John.
got a question.
Come on up,
Hey,
John.
John.
It's good to see you, buddy. How you doing?
Hey, good morning, Mitch. I should say it's morning here in Australia. It's about 10 to 7 a.m. tomorrow for you guys.
John's
It's always
joining us.
good
He's a
fun
time traveler.
from the future. Look, I've really enjoyed the session, Mitch, and really great to hear your advice, JaMarr. And I think it's
Thank
really
you.
good. The three things I've taken from it about the use of storytelling and humour and metaphor. I certainly use storytelling fairly regularly in my LinkedIn material. And engage in humorous ways. Usually not in my post, but when you interact with people in the comments, and
Hmm.
other people that I know and follow that do use humour. It's something I want to improve. The one thing I don't use very often is metaphor, and I know it's really powerful. So that's certainly something I want to get better at. Interesting story though, in terms of storytelling. That I thought I'd just share with everyone because I just saw this as soon as I got up this morning. It's a couple of days ago I did a post on LinkedIn, and it was about saying to people who work in the same sort of areas as I do in employment law and what I call the pointy end of HR is about having complaints made about them and that this happens. And it was basically a supportive post to say that this will happen to you even if you're doing your job right. And I included in there a very short story of how I was even sued once. When I was working about 20 years ago, and a bloke who didn't like what was happening to him sued me and the HR director and their boss and the director general, everybody. And what was really interesting about that is I got a post from not a first connection, which is this is often the case, but got a comment on it from another bloke who said, "Another Chat GPT post. Write something original, mate."
Oh my Lord.
And I thought, isn't that interesting? Because there's so much around at the moment of people using ChatGPT to, generate content that in fact is not their original words and that sort of thing. And I've used ChatGPT myself, usually to just generate ideas and get past block and things like that. But I responded to him, in fact, that this is a post I've used several times and rejig every so often. And the original post actually was from 2 years ago. So that's like 18 months before ChatGPT was even released. But I thought that was just an interesting reaction that I'd share because it's relevant to even if you do share stories and true stories. Apparently, not everyone these days believes that they're true.
Well, look, not only
Well,
are
my
you
my
joining us from
my
the future, John, you are a Chat GPT avatar. You know what's interesting? I'm glad you brought up Chat GPT before I hand the mic over to JaMarr
Mitch, that was a joke, Mitch.
because here's the thing. Here's the thing. When JaMarr's talking about creating content, you can use Chat GPT, and let's just say the content revolves around employer employee labor relations, John, which what you do for a living. You can ask Chat GPT, share with me 10 unique issues rarely discussed between employers and employees regarding XYZ, regarding time off, regarding pandemic leave, regarding maternity leave, or whatever it may be. And it will spit out 10 ideas you probably haven't even thought about that you can then use when you pick up your phone and you record that video. That's how we're using it, John. And it's so damn powerful when it comes to doing something unique. Your thoughts, JaMarr?
Absolutely. We prompt ChatGPT in order to develop prompts in our minds to connect us to the stories that we have deep inside of us that we often forget. When you ever pass someplace and you see something, a picture, a, a sign, and it reminds you of something from when you were a kid that you've forgotten about, that's what this tool can be for you in the present moment. It's a prompt. You prompt it to give you ideas that then trigger all of the memories. Here's something to think about. Scientists have actually broken down and figured out that we have approximately 89 billion neurons in our brains. And if you factor out all of the potential combinations and connections of your brain cells to one another, there are more connections possible than stars in the entirety of the universe. And you can run that through ChatGPT to verify what I just said. Just for verify.
It's such a powerful tool, and I look. I can't wait to see more of my brilliant friends start leveraging this tool to tweak, to come up with new ideas, to come up with fresh content ideas. And John, before we wrap up today, I also want to point out you use humor in a different way. Also, every Friday on LinkedIn, you post a cartoon that usually relates something, somehow to what you do. Not all the time, but that's something I look forward to each Friday. I mean, talk to us real quick, John, about your mindset behind doing that.
Oh, sure. Yeah, that's actually a good point. I forgot about that myself. Well, look, my approach generally is to look at posts as having one of three purposes. It's either to inform, inspire, or entertain. And the one that I do on the Friday, which is just a thank God it's Friday type post, and something that I've found humorous, is that apart from, I think the value add for the viewer of the post is they might get a chuckle out of it. So that's what it's there to do, is to entertain them. But what it also does is that I only use memes and cartoons that I personally find funny. And usually they're things that my wife has sent me during the week that she's sort of looking at, and then I go, oh, that'd be great for LinkedIn, so I just add it to my list. Because what it does in terms of a marketing tool is it shows, when we talk about authenticity, it shows potential clients what my sense of humour is. And again, if they go, well, I find that funny too, then that's another connection between them and me. It's like any aspect of authenticity in your post. You're showing a piece of you so that the people who may view that will be connecting into this idea of being known, liked and trusted. It's part of being liked. It's the second one of that. Well, I like John because his sense of humour is similar to mine. And similarly, I can't stand John's sense of humour, so I don't think I'll do business with him, which is a good thing for me and that person, because we probably shouldn't be doing business together anyway.
Exactly.
Even though law is a very serious business, I still use humour in my practice with clients, usually to alleviate some of the stress they're feeling.
It humanizes you as a lawyer, and I think that's the important point. Is it really does show that there's a human being behind your law practice. John, thanks for jumping up on stage and joining us. Really appreciate your insights and comments and thoughts, my friend. And we need to get caught up. JaMarr, before we wrap up today,
Yes.
let everybody know how they can reach out and stay in contact with you.
Yeah, so you can super connect with me right here on LinkedIn, add a friend request, customize it always, so I don't think twice about accepting you. But also, I have a course on LinkedIn called Super Connecting, a part of LinkedIn Learning. It's helped about 14,000 people and growing. Really proud of that. But yeah, from there, I like to just to say, once we connect on LinkedIn, if you want to have a virtual coffee with me for about 15 minutes just to get to know each other, we might be able to explore some ways that I can help you. I do everything from coaching on both the speaking, humor side, but also marketing consulting and content creation consulting. So would love to help anybody in Mitch's network go to the next level. And remember, content is queen, because she's got the most range on the board and will work for you 24/7, 365.
And that's what the Web3 Metaverse and AI Wednesday LinkedIn Live audio show is all about. I'm bringing amazing human beings like JaMarr Johnson on stage to add value for all of us. JaMarr, thanks so much. John, so good to see you. Thank you, everyone in the audience, for joining us. We've got more shows coming up each and every Wednesday. Look for updates in my feed, and definitely connect with me over on my LinkedIn Monday morning newsletter, where we talk about Web3, Metaverse, AI, and communication tips for business owners, creators, and entrepreneurs. My name's Mitch Jackson. This has been a wonderful show, JaMarr. Really appreciate it. Everyone, take care and never stop making each day your masterpiece. Bye-bye, everybody.
Sorry, Miss Jackson. Ooh, I am for real. Great job, Mitch. Great job.
Yo, wonderful. Thank you, JaMarr. That was fantastic. Really appreciate it. And
Uh,
have a great rest of your day, my man.